The Coiled Serpent, a philosophy of conservation and transmutation of reproductive energy, written by C.J. Van Vliet, published in 1939, and dedicated to the vanguard of the human race. Part 1. Formulating the Ideal. Chapter 1. The Serpent. Caught in the mighty coils of the giant serpent, humanity is on the point of being crushed and strangled. That serpent, which in the beginning was intended to serve human evolution, was foolishly adopted as a pet and unduly coaxed and fondled. Being overfed and pampered, and having its slightest whims complied with, the pet has grown into a monster and has overpowered its master and now threatens to destroy him. Out of the choking throat of imperiled humanity, the inner ear can hear a cry for help ascending. A fearful cry that swells and falls again, rises, pleading for liberation from the malignant creature's rigid hold. But there is no response, no outside help forthcoming. Man's precarious position is entirely self-produced. He himself it was who gave the creature all the power it now has by his habitual yielding to its growing demands, and he himself must remedy this self-created woe by unrelenting self-exertion. The serpent is the monster to be overcome. If man but wills, he can reduce its power. He can brace himself against the pressure of the uncanny coils. He can in fact subdue the unwieldy and unruly reptile by opposing its depraved desires. By will he can reduce it to civility again, and then its valuable hidden power will aid him in his ascent of evolution's path. Indeed, when conquered, the serpent becomes a means of life. Instead of appropriating the life force of man, it will then supply him with the greatest factor that can lead to a higher human existence. The turbulent serpent of sex will then be transformed into the docile serpent of wisdom, which will show the way out of the human toward the superhuman state. But man must not delay. He must unloose the coils before the monster crushes him. The symbol of the snake encoiling the body of humanity occurs in the mythology of various peoples, and Oriental literature mentions a serpent coiled up in a mysterious center of force inside the human body. While the two are not entirely equivalent, the uncoiling of this serpent within the body, as of the entwining monster, is held to be man's evolutionary task. Records of a serpent symbolism in some form or another have been found in all parts of the world. Especially of universal occurrence are the legends about heroes who conquer an evil serpent. And there can be no doubt that these legends symbolize the necessity of man's victory over the domineering influence of sex. For from the earliest times, folklore seems to have connected the serpent with the sexual function. Erudite investigators have come to the conclusion that the serpent always has a phallic signification, but what usually mystifies the student of symbolism is that though the serpent is exhibited as the representative of the evil principle, it is considered also in the opposite light. However, where the symbolism has not suffered in transition, there is a notable difference between the two portrayals. While the evil serpent is coiled, the serpent of good is always represented as upright. This is the transformed serpent, not any more coiled, but standing on its tail, its body slightly curved, reminiscent of the human spine, which plays such an important part in the actual uncoiling of the serpent. It is still the phallic serpent, but conquered, tamed, and thereby changed into the most valuable adjunct of man. Reflective inquiry into various forms of serpent symbolism shows that they contain a principle of supreme importance, namely, that every effort to resist the demands of the sexual urge will gradually lead to an uncoiling of the serpent, and therewith to spiritual freedom and untrammeled evolutionary growth. But this ultimate result cannot be attained without a conscious realization of ideal purification. Tremendous purity is the one secret of spirituality, of that factor of evolutionary attainment which must follow the acquisition of intellect, but which has almost entirely been neglected by mankind. Chapter 2. Ignorance. Humanity is like a child that is hiding away from its elders, who call to it because they know it should make an effort to develop its abeyant faculties. It is like a child that wishes to continue to play with distorted images of real things instead of becoming acquainted with everlasting realities. It is like a child that persists in remaining ignorant of the deeper verities of the science of life. Humanity plays with life, it plays with sex. It wants to perpetuate that playing rather than understand nature's eternal laws, rather than unfold its latent spiritual powers. It would play on until these very powers become stunted forever, until otherwise matured. It would become an imbecile in regard to spirit. If the clinging to toys persists, and if the ignorance is claimed as an excuse where there is only purposeful ignoring, there is an imminent danger of incurable idiocy on a spiritual level. And because it does far too little real thinking and remains obstinately ignorant of facts and laws concerning its own true nature, men err in their choice of pleasures from defect of knowledge. They are content with the little goods they have and adhere desperately to these in ignorance of the greater blessings to which they could attain did they but open their spiritual eyes. Mental development makes a child gradually set aside its infantile toys. After a while, it does not want them again, and would not at any price wish to exchange its arduously acquired mental enjoyments for a return to the foolish playthings which amused it when it was ignorant. So will spiritual unfoldment make man gradually leave his playing, particularly with such things as were never meant for play. It will make him rise above the customary sexual games. After a little while he will not want these again, will not want to forsake the far greater glorious joys gained in his spiritual growth for a return to the unwisely chosen playthings of his period of sensuous amusements. But through sheer willfulness and cherished ignorance, humanity seems to prefer to go on with its playing, even with the most sacred treasures on nature's altar. Childlike, it moans if it scorches its fingers when grasping the sacrosanct vessel in which burns the sacred flame. It groans when sickness follows the quaffing of the holy wine. It whines when it is taken from its ungodly, perilous game. It rages when it is threatened with retributory action of nature's exacting laws, and will not see that all the misery and suffering result from its own stubborn persistence in remaining ignorant of spiritual principles. Such ignorance is unavoidable in the infancy and early youth of a race, but the large proportion of humanity that has racially arrived at the advanced adolescent stage should now overcome that ignorance. It should know its own dormant spiritual powers, awaken them, and make them dominant. It should drop the unsanctioned toying and stop its wasteful playing with the life force, which is the most sacred force in nature. Civilization, Chapter 3. The energy of civilization, or man, is directed outwards. It is applied to materialistic and intellectual progress at the cost of the spiritual. Thus, our knowledge has increased, but not our wisdom. Industrial mechanics have astoundingly evolved, but not the modes of building character. While we are hastening from moment to moment, we have neither leisure nor repose for the development of character. The stressing of the physical sciences without a corresponding cultivation of the spiritual factors has lowered man's sense of his moral power and responsibility. The most noxious sign of the blight in the social atmosphere is the openly increasing laxity of morals. In fact, moral sense is almost completely ignored by modern society. The race may be more intellectual than it ever was, but it is not more spiritual. Intellect preponderates. At the same time, consciously hardly anyone thinks today of developing the soul. The great intellectual progress has been achieved to the detriment of soul life. Yet it is the character of the soul which determines man's level. Man has learned to control many of nature's forces, but as long as he cannot control the forces within himself, there can be no question of real civilization. Control of appetites is the first step in human culture. As regards his sexual ethics, man has retrograded. Although a milder mannerism in sexual expression has been adopted by mankind, it has not become less sensual, rather the opposite. Human culture has not carried things further than the putting of a finer polish on our animal impulses. The effort of our civilization has been to domesticate lusts, and now they are found and fostered in almost every home. In comparison with the mode of life which prevailed among mankind for thousands of years, we people of the present day are living in a very immoral age. Sexual morals have been cast aside. Sexual license would seem to be the unwritten code of modern society. We find ourselves in a welter of urban sensualism and immorality. Sex tends to permeate to such an extent man's mental and emotional as well as physical existence that sex and its expression have become an obsession, and the present generation stands practically indicted as one of sex addicts. Characteristically, one finds in this age of boasted culture, society saturated with sexual abuses from the bottom to the top, prostitution flourishing on a gargantuan scale, white slave traffic amongst the fastest growing crimes, abduction and seduction as daily occurrences, criminal assaults upon children greatly increased, abortions more frequent than at any period, and as lightly looked upon as the extraction of a tooth. Sexual relationships among students and colleagues of schools, epidemics of venereal disease in high schools, widespread indulgence in perverse sex practices by old and young, even the very young, sex plays on stage and screen attracting largest audiences, sex novels finding the best market, sophistical sex teachings disseminated without restriction, their popularity resulting from the fact that they provide excuses for personal weakness, and such a prevalence of male and female troubles that it would seem that civilization inevitably spells syphilization. Mere animalistic sex expression has no more place in worthwhile civilization than would mud huts serve as modern houses. But in our pseudo-civilization, worse than animalistic sex misuses are indulged in and condoned. There can be no question of real civilization until a relentless campaign against the domination of sex is well on its way. A lessening of the overwhelming influence of sex is necessary before the race can claim a semblance of true culture and of becoming spiritualized. It is just because spirituality has been practically discarded that sensuality has become paramount, for there is a close relation in inverse ratio between the two. Only where the one is absent can the other rule. Hence the great need of consciously and conscientiously approaching a spiritualizing ideal. In themselves, ideals testify to a high level of civilization, particularly when help to bring the spiritual nature to the forefront and the animal nature to the background of human consciousness. Therefore, human nature must be modified according to a definite ideal, and the needed ideal must in the first place diminish the overpowering fascination of sex, because it is not possible to develop civilization unless we can inhibit primitive passions. There is yet no civilized society. Above all other responsibilities, the task of humanity is to build up a genuine civilization, a corpus spirituale of mankind, a civilization in which a purified love, disentangled from all the sexual accretions, will come into its own. So there you have it. Those are the first 3 chapters of this book, and I'm not going to be reading out the entire book online. But I do think there's a lot of validity to the writing. But having said that, in my opinion, the writer goes to the far end of the spectrum, and I don't see how his proposed ideals could ever really be reached, especially on a large scale, on a collective scale. But if we look at what's going on in our own societies today, we have to admit that there's a problem. And, children's brains are not equipped to process adult content. And exposure to adult content at a young age can alter the brain. And being that young people have access to this type of material at their fingertips, it's not surprising that young people are confused and suffering with depression and unable to form close relationships that are meaningful. And just as an example, on January 13 in 2018, an alert was sent to Hawaii's people that a missile was heading towards them. and people were in a state of alarm for about 30 minutes before the government sent out a false alarm statement. And 15 minutes after the message was sent that told people of Hawaii that they were not in danger, P-Hub's views spiked by 48%. And on March 11, 2020, when the coronavirus disease was designated as a pandemic, by March 25th, 2020, P-Hub's views had spiked to over 24%. And studies have shown that viewing this type of adult content is addictive and activates the same parts of your brain as addictive drugs like cocaine. So as a society, I think we need to do better and educate younger people on how to balance these types of things and definitely steer away from that type of content. But I will also link the PDF in the description section if you're interested in reading it yourself. And yeah, that's about all I have for today. So I hope you enjoyed that, and perhaps you'll find it interesting and you may want to read the rest of the book. So I will link it in the description section. Anyhow, have yourself a great day, night, morning, wherever you are, and I hope to catch you on the next one.